Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conversations in Pop Culture, where I have with me Travis Gibbs. Gibb,
Yo, Gibb.
Gibb, Gibb. I misspoke. It's Gibb.
He
G.
knew he was going to mess it up. He asked beforehand.
I knew it. I knew it. I knew I was gonna mess it up. It just rolled off the tongue. My bad. But having said all that, you worked on several different comics, and I'm holding off on names for a specific reason. So, welcome to the show.
Hey, they're glad to be here. I'm excited.
I'm excited too because there's two parts of you that I kind of want to break it down. So there's the
Okay.
new stuff that you've worked on, which is Brokedown and Four Dead Bodies, and your Kickstarter that's going on, Voodoo Nation, as
Yep.
well as there's a lot of background stuff. And one of the books I want to talk about is Negative Burn that you worked on and had a few
Yeah.
stories in. And that's kind of going a little more old school. So
Yeah. Yeah.
how did that get come about? And Negative Man is very much an anthology type of book.
Yeah. Negative burns. So for people who don't
A
know,
burn, my
negative
bad.
burns. Yeah, negative burns. For those who pay attention to comics, all the big guys who you like now probably were in there. Neil Gaiman, Billy Tucci, Bendis, Alan Moore. All of them were in Negative Burn. So if you pick up an old issue of Negative Burn, you're going to be super impressed. Paul Jenkins, all of them. I am luckily that I am actually one of those as well. I am in it way later and way past when they were in it. Unfortunately, none of them are in my book. But yeah, absolutely. How that came about is I was friends with Stefan Nielsen, who used to work at Aftershock until like last year. Him and I were friends. My first published work was in his book called Government Bodies. So I wrote a small zombie story that I submitted to Negative Burns. Joe Pruitt loved it, and I got to get put in it right at the end. So I get my image credit, and I feel all good and big.
And so, what is that like? Because I did say it's very much anthology based. You get to have your story in there. You're with a bunch of creators, and you get your credit into a comic book, and it is getting your name out there to some degree. And so,
Yeah.
what is that entire experience like? Because I don't want to say Negative Burn is like Batman. I don't think we're advertising that either, but it's still out there, and it's somewhat like heavy metal to some degree.
Yeah, yeah. For the people who know what Negative Birds, for the people who are serious comic collectors, they know that they own all the issues. I'm one of the guys who own pretty much every issue. People hunt this down. If you ever go to a con, like you'll see Negative. It's one of those labeled comics that you're like, what the hell is this? Because you look at it and they don't look good. The covers never look good. Nothing looks it, but you look at the names and you're like, oh, I get why this is here. Or you'll see CGC ones on a wall because you'll see the first Bendis work because that's an interesting thing about comics, right? Uh,
Yeah.
the character is far more important than the creative teams, right? So no one goes, "What was Jim Lee's first work?" I can't tell you what Jim Lee's first work is, but some people care about that, and that's where you'd find it. So working on it wasn't as super exciting. Like I hoped I was part of like an exclusive club, but really it was submitting my stuff, getting it through editor approval, and getting it back. The negative of it is they take it very seriously, and it's not like an extra anthology that you do for like a mom and pop or like an indie comics company. They're like, if you want a copy, go buy it off the shelf. And it's not that they're rude; they're just like, that's not what we do. This is to help you grow your business. To get you in something a little bit more serious, a little bit mainstream. Um, I was at the end of it. I think I'm like one or two issues from the last Negative Burn that's done. I do know that they always talk about bringing it back, and like the Aftershock little anthologies like called Aftershock is kind of like Joe's like way of doing that, but they've never fully done it yet.
And you mentioned another book, and that's Government Bodies, which is also similar to that.
Yeah.
So, what was that like working on that? Because these were happening sort of at the same time, these two things.
Yeah, so I was walking at a con at MegaCon and I saw a book called Government Bodies. I'm a huge Guy Ritchie fan and I'm a huge Quentin Tarantino fan. So seeing a book with guns and violence on it, I was super interested. The book was actually more about government agencies trying to take down a mob, so that was less exciting. But I thought the cover looked like it was guns and violence, and I didn't even see the cover. I saw like a stand that he had, like of a print that I think is way better than the first issue's cover. Anyways, I met the guys, him and Jimmy Boot, who is over in England, who's done some work for Marvel. I talked to them, and what they did, and something that I give back on as well, is they had backup stories. So you could submit a backup story and you would get copies of that. So I submitted a backup story. I got into issue 3. It's a 4-page backup story about a gambler. That was my first work in crime. I called my friend in high school who was finishing up his art degree, asked him to draw it, all black and white. It was a beautiful comic. So proud to be part of that. So proud of the whole thing. I love it to this day. In fact, it's still on my table because I was so excited about my first work. I bought like 500 copies, so I still have copies of it. And it's funny because some people did pinups and they'll see me at cons and be like, "I did a pinup in that in 2003." I know, you want it?
So what is that like? That it's your first work and that it was a backup story and that entire experience? Because it sounded like Negative Burn was very serious, and while it's cool and all, Government Bodies seems like it was more fun to do.
Yeah, it definitely was. Negative Burns was like, "Oh, you've made it," even though that is not what it was, but that's what it felt like at the time. Like I am just as good as all these people because I put it. Negative Burns was Government Bodies was really tough. I wrote a really good for my first work, and I'm not trying to brag. I have a film degree, so I had tons of writing that got removed and butchered and tore apart before I ever did that. Most of my film classes read that script, and it was perfect for the 4 pages. So it looks really, really strong. So that was really cool. But what was cool about it is working with that guy in high school. It was really weird. So there was 2 guys. They're called Josh and Rich, and they're called the Fat Squad. And they're literally 2 fat guys who I really shouldn't give a crap about, but I always did. We hung out. We did backyard wrestling. We had a federation called RWF, and we did hardcore matches in the background. I hung out with these guys, but I was always that guy on the outside, right? I was never the guy. They would never call me to hang out, but if I found out they're hanging out, they're not going to kick me away like other people. But I'm just one level removed, right? So doing that with him was the coolest thing in the world. He's now a tattoo artist up in New Hampshire. That's like a well sought after. Like people come all over the state to come see him.
And to even further talk about a 4-page story, because most comics are 22
Yeah.
pages, and sometimes on the indies it's 44 or 50 pages now is where it's looking at. But writing short is harder than writing long by definition. And so, what was that like, writing a perfect 4-pager and having that really concise?
Well, luckily, I was a huge Neil Gaiman fan, so that helped me out a lot. So Neil Gaiman once wrote, he's like, if you can't write something in the minimum amount of time that it would take you to write it, then you're not a good writer. Like flat out, because he believes that short stories. That's why he has so many short story books. So you'll see like he'll have the Neverwhere, or he'll have American Gods or any of that, and then he'll have these short stories like Fragile Things and things like that, because he really believes that the shorter you could tell a story and make an impact, come in late, leave early, type of thing, that kind of writing style. That's a big deal. So I struggled and I really wanted to get it. And I've actually made it part of my career. So now in future, Travis now has a whole bunch of anthology stories that I put in this little book called Parallels, where I just kind of do short little anthology stories that I produce for him. I'm always trying to do anthologies because I think those are the most challenging. And what's great about anthology stories is you'll get rejected for all sorts of various reasons. It may just be the guy doesn't like you. It may just be it wasn't the right fit. It may be the other stories in the book are telling things out of a humor slant and yours is more serious. There's all sorts of things, and I love that. I love figuring out that puzzle. What are these people looking for? Because I think that's going to help me later in the career when I start pitching a Marvel, DC, figuring out what they look for, right? Some people like slam editors, right? The message editors, here's my book, read it. But if they're writing Superman, you probably shouldn't send your erotic, comic that you have, or even for me, like I shouldn't send my crime comic to the editor of a JLA. I should probably send it to the Daredevil editor, right? Like it's just common sense, but people don't do that. They just splam. They're just like, if they'll see I can write anything. No, you can't. And I've seen people who've tried.
And now I think that kind of jumps into where we want to go. And I know we're skipping several things here, but I do want to
Yeah.
start talking about your book, and that's Broke Down and Four Dead Bodies. because I think that's kind of something that's gotten you a lot of attention. I really enjoyed reading the first two issues. I'll be guilty. I didn't read the third issue. Complete
Oh,
transparency. But I enjoyed the first two issues a lot. And so, where did that idea come from? Because clearly, we kind of have crime and we have guns blazing and we got betrayal and setup
right.
and everybody going after everybody. So, where did that entire concept come from? Because I love these types of stories, and I also love the
Yeah.
fact that it's 4 issues versus 1,000. It's actually readable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, first off, you need issue 3. Issue 3 is probably the best of the run. And I say that just because my dad died in the middle of 2. And when it went through the editing phases, I didn't give that extra draft. I didn't do some of that stuff. And it's not that it's bad. It's just there was more I wanted to say and I couldn't figure it out. Instead of buckling down and figuring it out, I just was like, all right, let's get to issue 3. Issue 3 is really, really good. So you're missing out. But let's talk about it. So the comings of have you ever read Stray Bullets?
Yes.
So do you remember the end of the first issue?
Yeah.
So you've got I can't think of his name right now, but you've got the mentally handicapped kid, and he murders a whole bunch of people who offend him, and he walks away with like 12 bodies in the car. Like that scene fascinated me, and I was just like, what would happen if 2 mobsters broke down on the side of the road? What would that look like? How would it be? And then as I started writing it, I was like, let's give it not only a reason why they break down, but give a mystery amongst it, have them hate each other, really build a whole mythos of the book. One of the things that I'm really good at, I think, is developing characters. Each character has to have their own voice, their own reason for doing what they do. Put them all together and start this chaos. As Brokedown has moved along, we have added gangs, Mexican gangs, biker gangs, the police, the straight up mob, and kind of putting all that together and building this unique story and building something in comics that's not seen. Comics were built on crime. Crime was the number one selling for years before superhero came out. I really want to kind of get back to that. Crime and horror is where comics started, and I really wanted to throw back to that time.
And to even go further, because you said that these two characters, which are Randy and Denver, don't sort of like each other. And what I liked about this, and you talk about the character development, is that Randy spent time in jail, 4 years to
Mm-hmm.
be exact. Denver sort of has a bit of a record and is not perfect either. Yet we do get empathy from them being imperfect humans trying to climb up and make a name for themselves. And I don't want to say it's the American dream, but they want to progress forward in life. And
Right.
so we get this empathetic characters in a very unempathetic situation. And it creates a very cool juxtaposition. And that's why I like this book
Yeah.
a lot, because we get that crazy circumstance. So what is that like, really building out these characters and putting them into a situation and creating that empathy? Because in a lot of comics we don't get that empathy where we feel for these characters, or
Yeah.
half empathy, I should say, really, sort of.
Yeah, well, so there's 2 different things. As I pointed out earlier, I'm a wrestling fan, so I've always been a heel guy, right? Like I was rooting for Edge, I was rooting for Christian, I was rooting for Eddie Guerrero. If you're the bad guy, I'm rooting for you. CM Punk. Like I was always the bad guy. I'm not. I remember going to one of the WrestleManias, Edge's last match with Undertaker, and I really thought Edge was going to win because Edge had the streak. Taker had the streak. I was like, all right, they're passing it over to Edge. It's going to be great. And I remember yelling at a little kid going, and every time the Undertaker did anything underhanded that could possibly be cheating, and pointing out how horrible of a human being the Undertaker was. I hope I didn't mess him up, because that's not the way it's supposed to work. So I like the bad guy. But the other thing is, personally, my parents were drug and alcoholics, so they were dealing drugs out of my house on a regular basis. And I'm not saying this to like put my parents on blast; they're dead, so I guess I can't really put them on blast, anyways. But I saw really good people make some really bad choices because of addictions and things like that. So I really empathize with someone who does something bad that doesn't necessarily define. So good and evil's a little different, and I want to pursue that a little bit. Like you've always seen that where the guy will do these horrible things, but he won't do this one thing, right? It's always crazy, and those always make the greatest villains. I love Magneto. Magneto's all about what he's all about, making sure that the mutant race and stuff, but it's for good reasons. And he'll do whatever he can to do good reasons. And sometimes that makes him an X-Men. And sometimes that makes him an enemy of the X-Men. So I kind of built these characters to have all these flaws. When I write a character, I come up with their backstory and I have a traumatic event, and that traumatic event really triggers everything they do. Because I believe that's in real life. Everybody has something that they're just not over. And we pretend we're over it and think we're over it, but something will trigger it and it's not over. And that's what I kind of work on. So, all right, this situation happens. How does that event trigger their response to that? And that tends to build my character, add some spicy dialogue, and you're good to go.
Yeah, and it gets more complicated because they're also dealing with betrayal. And I'm going to ruin
Yeah.
it slightly. There's this
You can
guy
roll
named
that.
Miguel, and he kind
Yeah.
of screws these two guys over and sandbags them because, in case, just to give some background, they're sort of tasked to do a job for Mr. Washington, who's sort of running a gang, and then they get ambushed and they wind up with 4 dead bodies. To put it really succinct, and
Yeah.
well, it was sort of a setup by Miguel, and there's some other things in play, and so what is that like? And really, even to bring out Miguel's character in there and bring out Mr. Washington, and I love him because he reminds me very much of Gus from
Yeah.
Breaking Bad, and I like that a lot too in him, both in the way he looks and the way he conducts himself, very thoroughly and professionally and very cleanly, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. Well, first you got to read issue 3 because you find out there's another thing that you don't know. So we're not going to go that just for you. We're not going to talk about that. But when you talk about so the story of Brokedown, and this is kind of revealed in issue 4. They kind of revealed enough stuff. It's about a girl. Like it really is about a girl. All revenge stories are about a girl. Just so you know, it's about a girl or a dog if you're doing John Wick. But most of the time, it's a girl. So we kind of go into what that is in issue 4. We haven't even spoke about it. We don't even mention a girl in issue 1, 2, issue 1 and 2. But building these characters, their positions and what they're trying to do. Miguel's a really fun character because Miguel has been manipulating a lot of things, and he thinks he's smarter than everybody else in the room. And when he realizes he isn't, how he responds to that is very telling of people. My goal with Brokedown and Four Dead Bodies was to get these 4 characters, these 4 very different personalities in a room, and they're kind of mirrors of each other, right? So you've got Randy, who's trying to be calm, trying to figure out how to handle this situation, trying to get his head around everything. And you got Miguel, who will grab anybody with a gun to go just shoot it off to figure out the solution. And then same thing with Mr. Washington and Denver. They're the same thing. Denver, his response is, all right, we'll just kill it and move on. Let's just solve the problem by killing or getting more stuff. And Mr. Washington's like very calm, like, all right, let's figure out what's going on. How can we resolve this? So they're all the same they're basically archetypes of themselves trying to deal with this one scenario. And how it all plays out in issue 4 is going to be pretty exciting.
And it gets more complicated.
It
And I
does.
might be ruining parts of issue 3,
Sure.
but the mob gets involved. A
Yep.
certain type of mob gets involved. The Psycho 78s, which might
Yep.
be a reference to the Crazy 88s, because I know you're
It,
a
it
Tarantino
is.
fan.
It is actually, but not from me. That was a pledge level for Kickstarter. Someone could name the gang, and they wanted to name it that. I'm not a huge fan of them, believe it or not. I like them, but I didn't remember that song. I was just like, oh, whatever.
And then also the locals are now interested about, as well as, I don't know if I mentioned the police, but also the police are now involved in this. And so we get a lot of layers and dynamics and a lot of people looking at this situation, which I think heightens what you just stated about how everybody's an archetype and how certain people are very reactionary and certain people are very calm. And so that's a lot to play with in this and where it's going and what's happened. And we see this starting in issue 1 and more so in 2. And I would imagine in issue 3, which Haven't read yet. Gonna be reading it because we're going to talk about a certain cover of that issue in a second. But what is that to sort of play every note on the keyboard?
So I really like it. So my goal with Brokedown and Four Dead Bodies is I'm creating a Brokedown universe. So even though it's a 4-issue mini and this resolves everything, you never have to read anything else. There is more stuff after, but I'm doing it differently. My goal is it's a 12-issue arc total, but I'm not rushing to get it out, right? I'm going to do my 4 issues and then I'll do some stuff. You'll see 2 issues next year. So you'll see Brokedown issue 4 and you'll see Brokedown and Tapped Out, which is a wrestling story. So Brokedown and Tapped Out, for those who ask it, it's about basically imagine Hulk Hogan just down in his luck, needs to do one more match, does a house show. But the producer's like, I am also down on my luck, so I'm going to kill Hulk Hogan, and I'm going to be the only one who has it on videotape. So it's a murder live in the ring, trying to do that, and in the Brokedown universe. So that's what it is. We're going to do Brokedown and Tapped Out. That's the wrestling one. Brokedown and Patched In, which is a 2-part, which is a punk rock and then a biker tying into the Psycho 78. We're going to do Brokedown and Freaked Out, which is kind of a horror thing. But all of this is leading to the final arc, which is Brokedown and Locked Up, where we take a lot of these characters that we meet, because you may not see Denver and Randy in all these issues. You see them in the first one. They're not the main characters of any of those little one-shots. Go to Brokedown and Locked Up. All these characters that we fall in love with are all locked up in the same prison. We'll see how that plays out with an event.
Sounds like the anime Nambunka, I think it is called.
Oh, yeah. I watched a little bit of it. I never finished it, but.
Well, I'm required to say that because Damon Mills is the voice actor who plays the main character, and I love Damon Mills. But that's neither here nor there. I'm contractually obligated to say that. But anyhow, I do want to talk about one element of issue 3, which is the cover. And one of my favorite series is 100 Bullets. And I love that cover from issue 3. And that entire thing and that series is amazing. And so there are other covers that also pay homage to other series, but this one really stands out. And I know you're the writer, but what was that process in coming up with that and throwing that out there and having that as an option? Because it definitely is very cool to see an old school comic series done by Vertigo and very much crime oriented actually thrown on a modern day fun crime series to read, and that's actually readable, and it's kind of nice to bring that back.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do, and I got a lot of good press from it. A lot of people really dug me doing it because everyone does like the Days of Future Past cover or the Spider-Man swinging with the criminal cover. Nobody grabs these really good iconic things, and it's funny because that's not even the first issue cover. That is just the cover for the trade, Volume 1, the trade. But so many people have bought that first trade that they really saw it. I felt it really fit with what I was doing. There is a case involved in our story, so it kind of had those parallels that went together, so we could really play that out. That was done by James Burton, and I tried to make it a homage. Homages are weird. There's a lot of rules to it that you may not know. You've got to give credit inside to make sure that James Johnson know after him. So there's a lot of rules that I didn't know when you were doing a homage cover, but it was so much fun to do, and I really liked it. And what was cool about it is every issue of my comic, I always had a pro. So the first one I had Carl Moline do a cover. He's a pro. I had Rich Woodall, who does Electric Black over at Skull. Carl does Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He did New Avengers. He did Superboy. For issue 2, I had the Electric Black guy. He's also did Savage Dragon. He's done a whole bunch of stuff. But for the third one, I didn't have a pro in that slot. And the homage sold just as good as having a pro because people really dig those homage vibes. And I was really proud of it. People love that cover. I know tons of people who just bought that cover because they collect homages, which I didn't even know was a thing. So if you're an indie guy and you're listening to this, create a homage cover. There's people who will buy just that issue because they collect those homage variants.
And one of the things that I like about this, because this is a problem I have, and I think other people have it in the indie world, collecting and taking risks on certain things, where it wasn't even that expensive, all things considering, this book. And I think it's still somewhat available, I think, it can be bought off of your website.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's what, 10, $15 at the most, which is not that bad, all things considering. So that's something that I actually like about this, and I'm probably gonna wind up buying it because I got to read issue 3 anyway. So why not?
Right. Yeah, yeah, I do. I try to make unique things. I have two things that I do. I have an artist edition, which is like a black and white sketch cover. The last one was Walter Otley did it, and he does. If you're not familiar with Metal Shark Bro, great book. People really dig that. It has two trade paperbacks. That's my thing. But yeah, absolutely, the 100 bullets variant. But it's $10. You can get it from the shop. $10 is $5 shipping. No big deal. It's a really good cover. I'm super proud of it. And there's stickers too. Everyone who got it, there's stickers that came with it as well.
And then backing out of issue 3, and I know you said issue 4 is coming out in the next year and a half or so.
Mm-hmm.
So what can people expect? And I know you answered some of this, but what can people expect for issue 4, and what's going to happen, and sort of without
Yeah,
giving too much away?
yeah, we're 10 pages in. It's 30 pages. It's a 30 page book by the main artist, and then I have a backup in it as well, which will be another thing. So I'm looking at maybe a 48 page book, a double sized issue. So it's a big issue. Getting that out there. So that's one thing you can really look for. And I want to end with a bang. And all my issues are a little big. I mean, you bought them. Issue one's 32 pages story, which is unheard of in indie comics. Not unheard of, but it's rare to get that. Most people do the 24, 26, or they'll do a 48 to double it. But to do a double size issue, because comics these days are 20 pages. So in issue 4, we wrap everything up. I wrap everything up in a nice bow. You get some answers that you get. You get a couple of questions that you get, but the majority, you're not going to go from issue 4 going, I need to buy more Brokedown stuff. You're not going to do. You're not going to need to. Hopefully, you fell in love with the characters and you want to see them do stuff, or you love wrestling and you want to read that wrestling one. Or you love bikers or punk rock, because the punk rock one is going to be based off 100% off SLC Punk. I've talked to the guy, and we're going to do all sorts of cool stuff. So if you're a movie buff, SLC Punk is one of my favorite movies. So you're going to feel that vibe. You're going to feel that. In fact, SLC Punk is kind of in the thing. The main character goes to Salt Lake City because he thinks it's like the movie, and he finds out very quickly it's not like the movie at all. So issue 4 kind of wraps a lot of things up, builds some stuff, but we finally figure out what's in the case. That's resolved. We find out who is Maggie, who was mentioned in the last issue. You find out who that girl is. We figure out the connection. We see a job of Miguel Randy Denver from back in the day, which is kind of cool. I think that people really dig that. Lots of flashbacks, lots of fun. We get back into the witty dialogue and the stuff, because this is the big reveal moment, the big end. We also figure a lot of people have given me complaints about the book. The one thing that they complain about is they're like, you don't really use the police, right? So like you read issue 2, like the police are there for like 2 issues. They kind of
Useless.
Yeah, like what the hell's their point? In issue 3, literally they're in a SWAT room. Hey, we think we know where they are. Let's go here. Like, what are they doing? Why are they involved? You get your answer of why they're involved, and it's stuff. There's like 4 or 5 twists. I know Chuck has Chuck been on your show. I know. We just talked about Chuck.
Chuck Pina.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chuck Pina's been on. Yeah.
Yeah, Chuck read the ending because Chuck's kind of a story consultant, so I let him consult it and read it and see if it fits. And he was blown away at it. Like, called me at 1 a.m. to talk about it. Like, he really had some feedback of how well it is, how I spaced it out, how I shared stuff. So I'm super excited about it. It's. I think I landed the ending right. That's the biggest thing you worry about in comics. No one lands those endings. And I think I did. And I think the secret to landing those endings is what you said. Get out at 4, right? Everyone goes to 6. They go to 8. They go to a year. Like, get out early so you can land those endings, Imagine if Civil War ended, right at where Captain America just ended. Because it ends and they have a whole other issue after Captain America switches sides. Like, why? And then the biggest thing that happens in Civil War is Cap getting shot, which happens in Captain America. you know. So it's doing these things, and it's comics, man. It's how we learn and grow and try to build these things.
And before we talk about your other project, where can
Yeah.
people actually find and pick up? Because issues 1 through 3 are out right now.
Yeah.
People can catch up on that. Where can people buy it digitally? Where can people buy it in print? Because people sometimes like certain versions of it, or they want it faster, or it's just easier one version over the other. So where can people find it?
So there's two places you can get it right now. Well, three. There, I have a list of stores. So I have a lot of stores that are in there. It's about 20 to 40 stores. So you can get it from any of those stores. I have no problem with that. You can get it from my store, Brokedown4deadbodies.com. So you can buy all three issues. And there's also, you may not know this, but there's actually a 4-page like mini comic in the Advocator. So Advocator Winter Edition has a 4-page story as well. So if you want to have the complete collection, that's where you go for that. And you can buy all those at on my store. The other place that you can get it is you can get it on my Kickstarter, my latest Kickstarter right now, Voodoo Nations. There's a pledge level that gets you Voodoo Nations and all 3 issues of Brokedown.
And is it on Comixology? I think it is.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Yes, you can get it on Comixology, Comic Haus, and Spinwiz. So those are the 3 digital platforms that we use. All of them have all 3 issues, so you can check it out and do it. I always forget, and I definitely shouldn't forget, Comixology, because I have people go, "Dude, I love your book. I read it on Comixology." They'll meet me at cons, and I'm like, "But like, I have a book here." No, man, I read it on Comixology. When's the next one coming out? It's just the weirdest thing at cons when they're like, you have a fan, you know he's a fan, but he has no interest in what you're selling, and you're very confused.
Well, we're going to talk about that. I want to table that for a good reason, because we're going to talk about that later on. But I do want to talk about your other Kickstarter that's going on and your new project. And
Yeah.
I think a little bit less is known about this, and that's Voodoo Nation. And that's currently going on. I think you're, what, $700 away from meeting the goal and the project being greenlit, or greenlit on Kickstarter, for lack of a better word. And you got like 26, 27 days left still. So what the hell is Voodoo Nation's about, for starters?
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Well, first thing I want to let people know who've never bought from me before. Kickstarter is a scary place. This book is 100% done. We've done all the.
We were going to
When
talk
I say
about
100%,
that. You're answering all my questions before I even ask them.
yeah.
I love
Sorry,
this.
before you ask it.
Love it.
Yeah. As a Kickstarter, you've backed 1 and 2 clearly, so you've got them relatively quickly.
No, I did not get one of them relatively quickly at all. It took
Which one
two
did
and a
you?
half years for
Uh,
me to get a Kickstarter. Not yours, but I do want to make this clear, because I actually didn't back any of your Kickstarters
okay.
at all.
How'd you get them?
I bought your books off of Comixology.
Oh, I think you messaged me one time about that. I remember. Yeah.
But I do want to talk about this Kickstarter thing just to give people insight. So it took me, for one of my Kickstarters, 2.5 years to get my Kickstarter, and it's a very frustrating process. And so when you say the book is already done, that's a big green flag instead of a red one, and we like green flags. Continue.
Yeah,
Sorry for interrupting.
I show that in the Kickstarter too. I show the pages that they're done and complete, because that's the biggest thing. And me myself, I have a book called Dog Days that a lot of people know about. Dog Days is a Kickstarter that I was just the writer on. A publisher hired me and I wrote the book. He is a year and a half, almost 2 years, and hasn't fulfilled. Just like you're talking about, I wrote 120 pages and it hasn't done. He's still working on it, but it's out of my hands. So when I do something in my name, if I'm the publisher, which is Orange Gum Productions, I make sure that it's completely done before I go to Kickstarter, because I don't want something like Dog Days to happen to people, because it breaks my heart that people are still waiting for their book and things are getting slowly done. But that's neither here nor there. Voodoo Nations. So what it is, it's 2 guys. Two guys. No, that's Brokedown. it's RJ and Brent, which is a married couple. They're missionaries, and they go to Brazil. There's a major flood that floods the whole area, kills about 200 people. It's a real flood that happened. I cannot speak Portuguese, so I can't tell you the name of it, but it's a real thing. You can look it up. The flood happened. They come to help everybody out. So they start a little mission camp and start building basically what missionaries do, trying to build this thing. What they don't realize is that they put that on a voodoo priest territory, and that voodoo priest starts a war with them. But it's not just a normal war. He's not just like gonna fight them or like kill them or murder them. He has a psychological war with them and messes with their head, messes with their religion, really messes them up. And that's what Voodoo Nation is about. Is these people get destroyed, sent away from Brazil. It screws up their marriage, changes their way of life, and they have to travel to New Orleans and to Mexico to kind of make themselves right before they can ever really deal with it, to deal with this problem. And they find out that voodoo doesn't just leave them because they leave Brazil. They think they can escape it. And this keeps following them. Bishop Lucas is a bad dude. Uh, there's not a character in Brokedown who can resonate as strongly as Bishop Lucas as a bad guy.
And so to talk about that even more, because where does this come from? Because this is very much outside of Broke Down and that entire universe and is very different. And I like that a lot. And just hearing this is fascinating. Where
Yeah.
this is almost, I don't want to say it's the opposite, but it's very much on the other side of the spectrum versus just like a shooting out chaotic violence and arch
Yeah,
nemesis and archetypes and things like that.
yeah, it's hard to write, right? So the people when they read Brokedown, they really love the dialogue, they love the wittiness, they love all those things, which is great. Where this is a different story, so it's got a different feel. Yes, I'm still Travis. Yes, you're going to get some witty stuff here and there, but it's about the drama. It's written like a horror movie. The pastor, Luke Stone, is the artist. He's a pastor. I also I'm a Christian, and I actually am a pastor as well. You wouldn't know it if you read Brokedown. Um, I also have a master of theology who's the editor. All of us came together and we wanted to write a story that really attacks Christianity, right? Like really, really, because we don't like Christian. The reason why people don't read Christian books is because they talk about how great it is and that Jesus just saves everything. That's not real life. Like that's not really how it works. So let's stop pretending it is. So we really wanted to show real Christianity, what missionaries are like, because missionaries are great. I think missionaries are a great thing, but you know what? They go in and they invade other people's territory and they don't know what they're doing and they get into bad situations. So this is like an escalated version of that, like a fictional version of what really happens. I'm a web designer and I do missionaries' websites. You don't know how many times I'm like, so excuse me, I really have to add Thanksgiving? Like they don't celebrate Thanksgiving in November. Like that's American thing. Fourth of July, they don't need Fourth of July off, but we Americanize everything. And I really wanted to tackle those issues in a fictional way. And I wanted to create a universe. I'm a huge Vampire the Masquerade fan. Do you know what Vampire the Masquerade is?
I do. I do.
Yeah, love Vampire the Masquerade. So I wanted to create something that has clans and factions and things like that. Something that I really loved about that. So this is kind of what it is. Kind of grabbing that stuff, grabbing Baron Samedi and kind of throwing it all together and making some dark, sinister, world of darkness type feeling thing with my own vibe and attacking the religion that I'm part of just for fun.
Well, I like it. I like the darkness. I like the darkness and I like the saltiness coming out of your mouth
Right.
right now. Not gonna lie, because I'm the exact same way. And
Yeah.
so, having said all that, I don't want to ruin too much of it. But this is a 4 mini issue series. It's gonna be dark. It's definitely gonna be drama oriented. It's gonna be sort of supernatural ish. And so what's going on with the Kickstarter, what can people expect, where can people find the Kickstarter, because I don't want to ruin the story. I don't want to like sour it, because I think you
Yeah.
sold it perfectly well. And what are the rewards that people can get while they're pledging for it? And as you stated, the book is already done, so now it's just a matter of funding and sort of printing it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So Voodoo Nations, it's the four issue miniseries. My Starbucks arrived, which is pretty exciting. Um, I'm diabetic. This is probably not healthy. Anyways, so what you can expect is not just everyone gets excited about a character. Bishop Lucas is a great character. You're gonna love him. We plastered him everywhere that you can see for Voodoo Nations. But what's unique about Voodoo Nations is he's not the only voodoo priest that we deal with, and he's not necessarily the most evil voodoo priest that we deal with. So every issue you can expect a brand new voodoo priest that's designed for the area. So a New Orleans style. We're going to Mexico, so we're going to have a Day of the Dead type voodoo priest, and what that looks like. You can expect someone who actually respects the culture. I did a lot of research on voodoo and how it's practiced and what stuff. So though there's some fictional elements that I've added to it, there's also a lot of very, very real voodoo stuff that I address in it. And there's good voodoo guys and there's bad voodoo guys. You can address if you're into the hardcore music scene, like back in the day, straight edge, and like there's a whole genre of music called like hard, like screamcore and metalcore. I deal with a lot of that. The two main missionaries are form of that, so you can deal with a lot of that real stuff. Now, for covers and cool stuff like that, we have a cover by Stan Yak from over at Source Point Press. Stan Yak is fantastic. We've got that over there. I mean, I think it's $30 to get his cover, so it's not even that much. We have collector's kits for $60 that has like all the covers plus a virgin that you can only get in that pack. The standard comes shipped and everything for $12. We have a night and day variant, which is really cool. So it's the same scene with again mocking religion and being salty about religion. It's Bishop Lucas, the voodoo priest, on top of Christ the Redeemer, which is the big statue in Brazil that you've ever seen. If you've ever seen a picture of Brazil, they always show it. Literally going on top of it and wiping ash from like Ash Wednesday on his forehead, which is really a mockery of religion. It's really like I'm really excited. I'm hoping that like Catholic priests and stuff be like, so you guys claim you're pastors, we have to have a meeting. Like there's a secret cabal that Luke and I are gonna like unlock by being this blasphemous, and still be faithful. I'm excited about it. We have retail tiers if you're a retailer that gives you all sorts of options. And we have sketch covers. One of the coolest things about me and Luke being very similar, Luke is willing to do head sketches for you and send them out, which is really, really cool. So yeah, and you can be in the book. If you want to be in the book, go ahead and be in it. You also, the biggest deal, which hasn't been bought yet, which is shock, you can help me create the voodoo priest. So for $250, you can create the big bad guy from issue 2. Help me create him. I've got some ideas. You've got some ideas. Luke Stone is going to sit there and draw out your character, and you're going to get a credit for helping create that character. So, I mean, if I get picked up by Walking Dead, right? Charlie Solar, or whatever his name is, the first artist, he just sued everybody and got a whole bunch of money. You can be that guy. Do you not want to sue me and make money?
So to talk about that a little bit and talk about some of these rewards, what is that like to really open it up to fans? Because the indies, in that regard, on the comic front at least, do that a lot, and I've seen a lot of that happening, and it's very cool where sometimes people will get killed off in books, and that's will be part of background characters. But this seems like it's even more than that, where this is an intricate part of the story and where it's going. And so what is that like to give a lot of control to fans if they so choose to pledge and support?
I love it. Like we talked about earlier, the Psycho 78s was a named gang for bikers. The group that's the Mexican gang that's in Brokedown Four Dead Bodies is called El Pantaleone, which is fire pants in Mexican. I love allowing creators to have it. For this one, it's super excited. What I got the idea was Luke is really good to collaborate with. So when I created Bishop Lucas, I told him what I wanted, gave him a couple of ideas, and he started sketching right there. And he was sketching while I was talking, kind of like a caricature if someone's drawing your head, right? So he was part of that whole process. And I really thought that would be really cool to get a fan to be part of this and to create a character with them and help them do it. I'm going to have a little bit of say in like, hey, here's this character's goals, here's their objective for the story. But what the character's like and who he is and all that backstory, well, I'm going to help create that with the character and being part of it. I think that's what makes indie comics great is we can resonate with the fans and let the fans be part of the process and make it this really unique and special environment. that I think is super dynamic and not something you see everywhere, right? You even on a TV show when you win a walk and roll, it's never anything important. It's normally you sitting there and like you're eating popcorn and the main character waves at you as he walks by. It's never something intricate. It's never something valuable. I want them to be part of the story. I want them to see that value because I value every dollar that someone spends on my Kickstarter. I value everybody who wants to invest in my book. These books are hard. Voodoo Nations is a unique book, and it's a very hard book to say. It's a bunch of white guys writing a book about voodoo. I've got people already messaging me, hey, like, do you know about voodoo culture? Hey, are you sure that you want a black bad guy versus a white woman? And some of these things I really took seriously. She was always Puerto Rican. We just made her darker skin to kind of show, hey, we don't want that. The only reason why the main character wasn't black is because I did the Denver and Randy thing, having a white and black character. I didn't want to stick to my own thing. So there's a lot of stuff when you create a book like this that goes into it that people don't ever see. And I'd love to get someone involved in that and get excited about getting these packages of this unique story. I'll even talk about it here. I've got an exclusive cover that you can't see. So there is, at the last week of the campaign, there's a book called Mojo Rising, which is another voodoo book by another company. We actually have covers that will connect. So for their book and our book, that the two main characters are fighting. You're not going to see that to the last week of the campaign, but that'll be on it, and that'll be. Don't think you can't pledge now because it's only available as an add-on. It's not something that's going to be. There'll be a pledge level for it, but you're going to want to buy it as an add-on because it's way cheaper.
Can you say what company it's with?
The Mojo Rising. It's called Third Comic Empire. They're a small, relatively new publisher, but Mojo Rising's got a lot of things. It's got Jim O'Reilly on it, doing some of the art. It was really good. So it's another indie guy. We'll see how it goes. Their character is really, really cool. But yeah, so that'll be there. So expect that cover. That cover is done. I'm excited to share. That's going to be kind of our last hurrah for the last week of the campaign. And that's exclusive here. I've had tons of interviews and I've never shared that anywhere. So,
Well, we have an exclusive.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to ask a controversial question to highlight and elevate that exclusive. So one of the things is that between my first show and this show, I've had everybody in every political position on. So I've had a guy like Chuck Dixon, who was very conservative, and I had Denny O'Neil, who just passed away, rest in soul and rest in peace. And Denny was very progressive, and I go through everybody. And just to give a little history on that, so when Chuck and Denny were working on, they did the Batman run. And Nightfall was kind of the big thing for those who don't know.
Yeah.
There was no politics in comics. And now, fast forward, it's you do draw it one way, or you don't draw enough of a character, or you draw Batman a certain way. It becomes political. And I think you were talking about this, about, your main villain and having that white and black dynamic in Brokedown, and then what you wanted to get out of your element, and even going into voodoo. So what is that like for you? And I don't know where you stand politically, but it seems to me that comics have become way more political in the last 5 years. And it becomes a problem when you're pitching to certain publishers and even people picking up certain books and the entire business. So I'm just curious how you, I guess, deal with that, because it seems to me that it's very complicated, and I tend to be a free speech absolutist. I think it's BS politics. I think if you can write a story, that's all that should stand, and I don't really get if a character is drawn a certain way, why it's such a big deal, or if you go one direction. I think it's blown out of proportion, is my opinion.
Yeah, it's super hard. It's super hard. So I have a lot of fan base in the Black community. They really love Brokedown. They really identify with Randy, and that's great, which I really love. But even with that great fan community, I'm never gonna, I've written in the script the N word. My wife is like, who's my editor? Nope, because it's just political and it sucks. It really does. Because I watch like a Quentin Tarantino movie and Django Unchained, like that's every 2 minutes. Even like Reservoir Dogs, all that stuff is put in there. But for some reason in comics, it's not okay, right? You've got to be blind, even though realistically, that's what that character would say. Like, look at that character, Denver, the way he acts, the way he responds to stuff.
Yeah.
And then you go to Voodoo Nations, and I'm writing this, and I've got to be careful about the Haitian community, like not offending them and not offending the voodoo culture community, because it's a very, very rare culture. But I argue you, how many people do you know who practice voodoo in the United States? I don't think anybody's coming to get me if I talk about it, right? So it's a really unique thing, and it sucks. I tend to be a little bit more liberal, um, but I'm also, like I said earlier, I'm a Christian, so I have tons of conservative values. So I kind of I hate when people say the middle of the road, because I definitely lean left. I'm definitely not going to say that, but I get that. But I hate that your political view dictates who you get as a backer these days, who you're writing for, and the stories that you can tell, which shouldn't be the way it is. A story should be told to entertain and to do stuff. Comics have been political, and people have this, talking about Danny. Danny was super political when he did Green Lantern and Green
It's
Arrow.
all about
He did it
heroin and Speedy. It's about heroin and
right,
Speedy. It was very, but I don't think it was political as it was today. I think it was very different then.
right.
Pushed back
Well,
a
but
little
those
bit.
were political statements. I mean, because for all the stuff that we know about the Speedy, he was attacking Vietnam War like heavy, like it was definitely anti that. Um, but we're in a spot today where people care about those things. I was just in an interview earlier today where we talk about Garth Ennis and Frank Miller. Like, they can write some crazy offensive stuff, like Holy Terror from Frank Miller really just like bashes anyone who would ever be a part of the Taliban, or anybody who would ever read the Quran. Like, it's really, really nasty stuff, but he gets away with it. But someone like an Ethan Van Skyrim, who's very opinionated, is shunned and has to do his own thing. It's a sucky situation, but what I try to do is, when I create stuff, I try to at least allow someone to be the voice and look at it from a perspective from an outside. I don't always change everything. I was recommended to get add someone of color to all my editing stuff, and I didn't think that was necessary. I'm writing a religious book. I get far more value out of someone who has a master's of theology than I would getting an editor who is of color, just so he could tell me, whether or not I go too far with the voodoo culture or not. I don't think that's fair. I think you should always have consultants or story people to talk to you and stuff. That's just you being a good writer, making sure you do your research, making sure you don't do stuff. But in today's climate, if we're going to create things, or we're going to create powerful stories that impact people, we're going to have to get a little bit less sensitive. We're going to have to do some things to really make impacts, because the stories that really impact people, like not just a death of Superman, not like a breaking of Batman's back, but something that really has something to say. That's really interesting. Bendis, his new Superman's identity is really connected to the coming out of of a child. Of It's written as if someone was coming out of the closet. It's written in that stuff. Those things can be really impactful if we do it right. But what we don't need to do is hit genres, right? I don't need a gay character if the comic doesn't need a gay character. If I don't need a black character, the comic doesn't need a black character. Tell the story you want to tell, but make sure that it's open access for everyone. Does that answer your question? It's a hard question to answer.
Oh no, no, it's a very hard question to answer, and the reason why I bring this up is that about a week ago, I'm a big Zenoscope fan, and they get
Yeah.
a lot of flack and variety, and they were talking about this with Sean Chen a little bit, and
Mm-hmm.
Sean Chen, just for those who don't know, writes Batman Beyond. He doesn't write Batman Beyond. I'm sorry, he's the artist on Batman Beyond, and he was talking all about this, where it's become massively political, not to the point of even criticizing policy, but party based. And I come from, I tend to be free speech absolutist. I tend to be more libertarian. I have a lot of values on education and things where
Yeah.
I'm not advocating for complete disestablishment of government, but I know people in DC and Marvel who can't come out as Republicans because they will lose their job. And that's what I mean, in which that's how this industry has massively changed. Well, Chuck Dixon during Denny and Nightfall. And Nightfall's highly political in many ways
Right.
about superheroes and what is a man and where we go with that. But Chuck was fine being a traditional conservative, and Denny was fine being a progressive, and Denny was the editor, and Chuck was the writer and kind of the
Right.
brainchild, and that was perfectly acceptable. And now in today's climate, it's very different, where there are conservatives in DC who have no political opinion, and it's not that hard to find out who's who on Twitter if you just look at what's being tweeted.
Right.
And I know this because I've had private conversations with a variety of people. And so I
Yeah.
just think it's very interesting, both on the writing side and the creative side, because in free speech, I need to be able to offend you in order to have a discussion, and not to the point, or risk offending you. So with Brokedown, that we could say that elements that if you didn't feel comfortable enough to write, you couldn't tell that story. And I would imagine
Right.
with Voodoo Nation, it's very similar. You have to run the risk of being offensive to truly tell stories. And that this is why I've left actually a lot of the mainstream and I've gone indie, because I feel that indie has done that much more effectively. Where they're like, look, you know what it is? I need $3,000 to start a Kickstarter. I don't need 15 grand to print my book and then have DC breathe down my neck.
Right.
And so that's how I view it personally with what's going on. And then I think that's why indies are becoming bigger and bigger. And I think we're starting to see that, which kind of leads me into Kickstarter. So a lot of stuff's going on Kickstarter right now. There's a lot of changes. And you mentioned this earlier. And one of the changes I think is more of a technical change in the way projects are being done. And I'm curious how you feel about this, where I've noticed, and a lot of people that I've interviewed either have 90% of their project done or have 100% of their project done and are almost using Kickstarter as a pre order form. And are using it more to cover printing costs and pre order and to ensure that everybody gets their book. And to me, it seems that that's your motto on how
Right.
Kickstarter is being done, at least with you and your company and your projects. So, how do you feel about that as the change that's kind of going out there to get a little less controversial?
Well, again, I don't mind being controversial, and it's you're right. It's a tough world out there. And I mean, even Kickstarter, and Indiegogo, like it's a political. It's almost political. If you're a conservative, the odds are you're going to run over Indiegogo. If you are a less conservative or left, you're going to probably run on Kickstarter. Like it's hitting every aspect of the creative process, which is insane, and it's crazy. But yes, I've noticed that a lot of people are creating stuff, but that's because that's what people are teaching. When somebody asks me, hey, can I do a Kickstarter with 10 pages done? I tell them no. You need to have it done because anything could happen. I've backed tons of Kickstarters, and I have a few that I haven't got. But every Indiegogo I've had I've never got a single Indiegogo. I've backed 7, I've got 0 back, 0. Um, but the reason of that is people are starting to be held accountable for the things that they do. In fact, this week there's a guy who did a book called Nomads. He had not fulfilled his Kickstarter for Nomad number 2, and went ahead and went large. Was doing really well, got like 2 grand. He needed 3 already on day 1, but people really called him out and said, "Hey, you haven't fulfilled your stuff until you get that book out. You shouldn't be on Kickstarter." And he put it down. And really, Kickstarter and Indiegogo should be the ones monitoring this. It shouldn't be the creators, but
Great.
it's now called down now to the creators who are hitting these people up and going, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing these things. These things are not okay." Um, and I think it's different if you're a pro. And well, I say this. The hardest part is pros who do it, because pros, there's 2 different types of pros, right? There's a Chuck Dixon. Chuck Dixon writes is always writing something. He always has something going. He's always doing something. And then there's pros who got fired because they couldn't put their pages in on time, whether it be writing or art. And they go to Indiegogo or they go to Kickstarter and they run their stuff, and then they don't produce their stuff for a real long time. And the reason why they were fired is because they couldn't produce. Like, that was the reason why they were fired. But you don't know that on this side of the table. So they get tons of money and they make the platform look bad. So for every Chuck Dixon who has tons of Kickstarters and they fulfill and get stuff, or even Ethan Van Skyrim, though he was delayed, he did get the book out. There's tons of people who haven't got their stuff. So I like to be part of the good crew and go like, I'm going to get you your stuff. I've got it all together. And it also means something, right? Kickstarter, the greatest thing about Kickstarter now is there's certain publishers in the indie playground who will look at my stuff, even though I've done a Kickstarter, and look at it to still get it in Diamond because it doesn't disqualify me, which is really, really good. So I can have a second wing. Scout's done that with White Ash, and they've done it with Electric Black did the opposite. They produced in Scout, and then they went to Kickstarter. Tart from Kevin Joseph. So it's a unique environment right now that we can do some really cool things. Even Source Point Press just did it. So I really like that we're doing it. But there is, even in any spectrum, it's funny, there's levels even in this indie place, right? There's people who you are the top tier of the Kickstarter level, but you haven't get it to the mainstream indie. You got to get to the bottom of the Kickstarter, the non-Kickstarter publisher level, and then work your way up. And then you've got to get the bottom level of Marvel and DC, and then you work your way up. And then you go to Image and work and be Kirkman and don't need any of that anymore somehow.
Yeah, and to talk even more about Kickstarter, because the other change in Kickstarter, and I think you mentioned part of this is, and this is sort of a double-edged sword, where we now have Todd Mcfarlane came into Kickstarter for his Spawn toy, and that did over $2 million. We had Charles Soule and Ryan Brown that just did $120,000 on curse words. I think Jeff Lemire is on Kickstarter, and then go to
Colin Bunn's on it right now.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Colin Bunn's on it right now.
That too, and then also we go to Indiegogo. Ethan Van Schreiber just did $1 million on his book. And not to go too political, but what does that mean for the indies? Because, as I stated, it's sort of a double-edged sword where we have the big boys coming in from Image and putting out interesting books, and we got their establishment money, for lack of a better word. And it's good because more foot traffic is coming in, but at the same time, it seems to me that it also would take away from the indies to some degree as well.
So I'm gonna be a little political here in the spectrum of things. This is why Kickstarter, in my opinion, is the better platform. Reason why: Kickstarter holds their credit card information and it lets people know an equal footing of what's on the platform. So when when you back your Todd McFarlane thing, it's going to put related products at the bottom and recommend them. Indiegogo does it similar, but Indiegogo doesn't necessarily do live stuff. They do things that are on in demand. So Indiegogo is on some level a little smarter with it, meaning like, so if I back at Indiegogo, odds are I'm going to see Ethan's Kickstarter as a recommendation, even though he's not on Indiegogo, even though he's not live right now because they have the on-demand platform. So what that does is it just gets Ethan more money, which is fine. But if you go to the Kickstarter side, it's a random shoot of who's getting put in that bottom slot. And it's things that are live that need money right now. So you have an extra shot to get those things, which I think is good. The other thing is, regardless of what Ethan may say, the highest grossing Kickstarter in the comics category is Knights of the Dinner Table. Not Knights of the Dinner Table, I'm sorry. What is it? I am struggling to remember. Is it Knights of the Dinner Table? Let's just say it's Knights of the Dinner Table. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It's it is Knights of the Dinner Table. They have the highest grossing. I know Ethan's claiming he has it, but he hasn't quite hit that mark yet. And that was like 3 million or whatever the case would be. And they still haven't fulfilled, by the way, because there's just a different level of that stuff. Todd McFarlane, though he did more than Ethan and these other guys, Todd McFarlane didn't get it because he put it in the toys category, even though a comic was connected to it. So I think that these people, I think they hurt the platform. Yeah, I do think it hurts that we have to do it, but it also levels us up who making waves in Kickstarter, and then it allows them to see us. Because just the other day, a friend of mine reached their 10,000 mark, and Colin Bunn reached to share a backer update with him. How cool is that? Like a creator who's already doing some stuff is sharing stuff and kind of slumming it with us. So it makes more credibility to the platform. if Cullen Bunn and Charlie Shows brings people to the platform who would never see me because I'm not in Diamond, I think that that's a good thing. You just have to understand that it's going to be a little bit harder to fund. And it is a little bit harder to fund. I normally fund in a week, and I'm still pretty close. Let's see where I'm at right now. I'm at 24 or 3, so I'm at 80% funded. So I'm getting there. I'll probably fund, if I don't fund today, tomorrow, or the day after. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the ones who do this pretty well. Some people struggle and have to wait till the last minute to get their stuff going. These other people coming to the platform really just show the validity of the platform and show that we're real creators, help us get that stuff out. But it's all about us producing. That's the big thing.
And in many ways, I think it also shows a massive change in the industry. I think people are understanding that certain things can now be done without the big guys. I think Image proved that 10 years ago, or 11 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, when they started stealing market share from Marvel and DC. And I think now Indiegogo and even Kickstarter, and not to get too political, because any type of crowdfunding, really, I mean, we could have a third one, a fourth one. I just think those are the two biggest ones out there. Also show that now you can have printing on demand, and you could have a bunch of people printing your stuff, and you could print anything. You could print a comic book, you could print a trade paperback, you could print a gaming manual now if you really wanted to. And so I think that's something that also shows a very different evolution in the comic world. And I'm curious where you think that's going, because obviously I have an opinion on it, and I think that we are going to more creator-owned and more indie projects, and also more freedom away from publishers saying, oh, nobody wants to see this. I mean, I'm a big Joe Rogan fan, and he's proven the model that people do want to listen for 3 hours and have intelligent conversations, or not intelligent conversations for 3 hours, and actually hear somebody explain a point.
Depends on the day.
It depends on the guest, too. It depends on the guest, too.
Well, I think Howard Stern proved that way before Joe Rogan, but well, maybe not the intelligent part, but that people will listen to you if you keep talking. I think so. We've proven that print is not dead. Like, that's the first thing that we proved, because you've seen it. However, we've also proved that digital has a huge impact. Look at any Kickstarter, and the majority of the funding comes from digital. And that's one of two reasons. One, someone just wants to throw a couple of bucks at somebody. Two, they really collect digital comics because they really just want to get it in their system. And they're not going to be able to get it on the second base. They're not going to be able to torrent it or whatever. So they want to get it through that stuff. Or three, they don't want to wait to Comixology, because Comixology, because of Marvel and DC, Comixology prices are really high. Like Brokedown, I think, is $3. I mean, it's not a bad price when you're factoring in they give you 20 and I give you 30. But at the same time, $3 for a digital comic is a little tough to swallow.
It's a little pricey.
Right. But everybody on that platform is that price. So it's not like I'm overpricing anybody else. It just is what the platform is. And people like Action Labs stays in business because of their comicsology market. They don't do really well in the publishing market, in the diamond stuff. So I think we're going to see more digital platforms. Well, I would really like, if I had one advantage, and I actually just thought of this during this conversation, if Kickstarter saved all those digitals and made a nice little comicsology type thing where you kind of upload it, that would be really cool. Or Indiegogo, where you kind of upload it and you have a catalog where you can save them. Right? They allow the storage and it stays there, and you log into your Kickstarter and you can have all your digital projects for anything, for music, for anything. That would break doors open. That would be really good. And then it's used as kind of a social media platform. I think that more and more people are going to go to the Kickstarter. Brian Polita from Lady Death proves over and over again that you can sell. The collector's market loves Kickstarter and Indiegogo. A lot of my people are literally just hunting, hoping that I'll make it, hoping that my book gets picked up by Scout or SourcePoint or Image one day, and that they have an early edition that will help them sell and, do stuff. Imagine if the Ninja Turtles could do this. The Ninja Turtles would have never even done half the stuff. They could have been making money forever if they could crowdfund. The reason why they stopped making comics is it got too expensive, and that's why they had to sell their property. Imagine if they could have kept making their thing over and over again without the big guys telling them what to do. They also wanted to sell to Marvel and DC, which Marvel was not interested. But that's irrelevant. So that's where I think it's going. I think that Kickstarter is going to be a bigger track of the platform, but I also think Kickstarter, if they want to stay in the game, they need to make it like it's a Comixology. They need to make this because there's all these new places like Comixology are going to do it that are trying to do stuff, and Comixology is hard. Most people who use Comixology doesn't like it. So eventually, we're going to have a digital platform that really works. That's really gonna kick things up a notch.
And even to add to that, a lot of what I do on Kickstarter when I'm looking for a project to back is I'm looking for certain artists. So I'm a big fan of certain people, and I'm going to throw out her name, Sun Kumanaki.
Mm-hmm.
And Sun does a lot of work, and she's done a lot of stuff for Kickstarter or Jamie Tyndall, and
Right.
he does a lot of work, and I like his work. And
Right.
just because it's not a Zenscope cover for me doesn't mean, and I'm biased towards Zenscope, and anybody
Sure.
knows me knows that, and I love that company, but like I like his work. And so sometimes with that, I am a collector of certain people's work, and I'm just interested in that variant. And I think you said with Voodoo Nations, there's a variant cover, and some people just want a certain artist's work, and they don't
Right.
necessarily care if it's from an indie work or an indie project, or if it's from Marvel, DC, Image, or anything like that. They just want that person because they have a collection of their work. And I think that's something that's massive on Kickstarter. I think that's also part of where the future is, where we have all these cool artists going out on Kickstarter, and there's a $30, $50 variant. If Ebass, and I love Ebass, and if he did a $100 comic variant and it was a great cover, I might support somebody's Kickstarter who I have no idea who they are, and I might
Right.
not even like their book, but I like that cover. And I think that's something that's another thing with Kickstarter is that's something out there. And Zenscope does this also, where they have exclusive comics with their Kickstarters they do, and people love that, and people pledge like an extra $100 because they want those books,
Right.
and you can only get it on the Kickstarter. And so that brings me to my next discussion point that I want to have with you, because I think it's relevant to Kickstarter. I think it's going hand in hand, and that's COVID-19.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because I don't know how many cons you go to. You mentioned it. I told you to table it earlier on purposely. How somebody's reading your stuff on Comixology, and they're like, "Oh, I'm a fan of yours, but I'm not buying anything because I already read it. When's the next issue coming out?" And so, how has COVID affected you from a business standpoint and promoting the book and getting it out there and even publishing it? Because I'm not too sure on the printing side and all that stuff in the comic world.
So I'll tackle all three. So the positive, Voodoo Nations is a book literally spawned from COVID. The guy, he was free because of COVID. So I got him and I locked him in. I really wanted to finish Brokedown before I started any other major projects because, you should really finish something, prove that you can do it before you start pitching them on something new. But he was available, so we got that. So that was really good. But now you go to Brokedown without conventions. I am losing all my extra table money that I would give to my artists to finish Brokedown. If I have that role that I want to go 100% before I go Kickstarter, which is a self done rule, I have to figure that out. So I have to get that money somehow, right? Um, so that's been a problem. So that forced me to do an extra Kickstarter this year called Parallels, which is my old anthology work. I did 1 and 2, and I put that out there, and that was literally, for lack of a better term, like a money grab. Not that it wasn't a good book or that I'm not proud of it,
Funding
but
grant.
I
Funding grant.
funding
I'm
grab,
correct.
funding grab. There you go. I like that. I like that. That's better.
PR Andrew is now working.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But literally, I said it in the writing that all of that money literally went to buy Stan Yak's cover for Voodoo Nations, to give my artists some more money, literally to make that. Voodoo Nations is one of the first ones that I actually budget, and I don't normally do this. I'm just because normally I'm so confident that I can make a whole bunch of money on the back end because I can sell it and do all this. I was afraid. I actually budgeted my writing payment into Voodoo Nations, which I've never done before. That's why it's 3,000. Normally my Kickstarters are 2,500. It's that $500 goes to me as a writer. So literally, so I can flip it to pay for Brokedown to keep going at. So it's been a struggle. Printing as well. A lot of our Kickstarter friends haven't been able to fulfill their Kickstarters because they went overseas to China. Because if you get past the 2000 mark, printing over at China just makes a lot of sense. But it's stuck there, obviously, because of COVID. So it's stuck. It's not coming over there. So now they can't fulfill their Kickstarter. They can't do their next Kickstarter. What are we going to do? So it's been a messy road. I've seen Kickstarters that have been able to capitalize. I've seen a couple of friends of mine who've got to the $10,000 mark and they've never been able to do it. Three of my friends have, which has been really great. Numbers are a little down. So like right now, I checked yesterday and there was 199 Kickstarters live. Normally, this time of year is 212. Now, please let me explain. You're like, that's not a big difference.
No, it is. It
Well,
is. It is. It's
well,
absolutely
no,
it
no,
is.
but it's not. It's not. A normal Kickstarter thing would be like 300, 325. It's only 212 because of San Diego Comic Con. People don't like to launch during San Diego Comic Con because everyone's talking about all the other cool stuff that they should be talking about. Your indie book doesn't matter. And so people who really care about the industry don't, this month is dead, right? You don't ever launch anything in this month. But now we are.
And,
It
and,
looks
and,
like
and let's talk about that because I think this year is the exception because I think it
yeah,
is clear to me, it is clear to everybody else. For those who don't know, I had Dave Franchini, who is basically the editor in chief, exclusive editor for Zenoscope, and we spoke about this. And they do a bunch of virtual cons, and that's kind of
yeah,
where this idea came from. Zenoscope does a bunch of virtual cons. They sell a lot of merchandise, and that's where this entire idea of what I'm doing came from. They started in March. I started like 20 days later after they did doing this interview work. And so I give credit where credit is due to some degree. So the thing is that I guess it's kind of like what's going on with all this is that I think nobody's talking about mainstream. Nobody's at any cons. Everybody has extra money now, per se, if you're not being hurt economically and your family's not in danger and you are getting your government check, which we're supposed to get another one of, and a bunch of people had an extra $1,200. And I hate to say this, but people are spenders in this country.
yeah.
And so I think that this year is the exception to that rule in July. Because while
Yeah.
there's a lot of comic news coming out, I don't hear anybody talking about DC or Marvel anymore. I hear everybody
Well,
talking about a bunch of other stuff.
I mean, they're talking about DC and Marvel, but again, it's
Less.
stuff that they've been talking about for 6 or 7 months because it's been in their previews for 6 or 7 months because they're so behind, right? They're talking about Joker Wars, they're talking about Empire, but like no one cares about it because we've heard about it for 7 months and we're finally getting it and we don't care anymore. The only thing we care about is when Donny Cates makes another Venom or Thor. That's it. That's the end of list of what people care about. Three Jokers looks good. And this is where indie is doing really well because Marvel and DC, they're going to take the rest of the year to catch up, to talk about new things that they hadn't already solicited from before. So indie, if you didn't do pencils down, because I know some indie companies went pencils down, which I think is really dumb. If you didn't go pencils down, you have an edge for the first time, and I think you're going to see it. I think you're going to see it in the next Diamond Report. Without DC, you're going to see a very, very different smoke. And the other thing you got to factor in too, uh, if you are in Diamond and you're an indie comic like a Zenoscope or a Scout or a Source Point, you're going to
Big
get a
money.
bigger platform
Big money.
because yeah, because they don't want to spend the money on DC for the extra shipping. They need to. If you're when you're in Diamond, you're based on how much you order. So they're going to order a little bit more than they would to even things out, and they're going to order a little bit less from DC, unless for some reason their store is crazy DC. But the majority of stores, by statistics, by the stats, is Marvel. So you're gonna go spend more money here than DC. DC's hoping to even that out. That's their goal, and I think they will eventually. But until that other distributor adds another line besides DC, it's going to continue to give Diamond a little bit more, and the indie guys getting a little bit more books. And it may be one or two books, but if it's one or two books per store, that's going to make a big difference. Look at No Heroine, came out this week, sold out everywhere, all the variant covers, everything. Source Point Press has never had something like that, but it's something that's something new, something that people are into, and it's doing really well.
And yeah, I mean, we're talking about San Diego Comic Con, and
Yeah,
obviously that's all canceled and that's all messed up. It's going on right now. We're going on right now, and clearly, this is a change because for the first time in 50 years, basically San Diego didn't happen. There's a thunderstorm in case anybody can hear it. It's very scary. I don't have my thunder button. I want to make that clear. It's very scary. But one of the things about San Diego not happening, the first time in 50 years, and I think it's a massive indicator with COVID that I don't think any con's going to happen this year. I mean, New York Comic Con is quote unquote still on. Anime NYC is still on. I don't know where you are. I'm in DC. For those who want to know where I'm at, Awesome Con was canceled. And so I'm just curious what you think of all this con stuff because I think it's evidently clear New York Comic Con is not happening. And I think New York City would be ludicrous to let it happen.
Well, who would want to go to a con anyways? Like, let's be honest. Like, let's take the Trump's big speech that he did in Idaho. Like, let's take that, his Republican little convention. How many people showed up to that? And I'm not saying this to pick on Trump. These are people who don't believe in the COVID. These are people who were told to not believe in a lot of the stuff or the hype or that it's overthink, and they didn't come. So if you're asking the left side, who is actively saying that we should stay home and do all this stuff, who are big comic buyers, if they're going to come, it's not going to happen. There's not going to be another con this year. There'll be small cons that'll start pop up, sure. Like One Day Con, I know there's one in New Hampshire next week. There'll be some small one-day shows, but nothing of value is going to happen.
Even to talk about that one-day shows, even that's going to be small. It's not. Right. I mean, there's no way that's going to be big. It's going to be less than 500 people at best. You know, I'll give an example. So there was a short show, just like a buyer's market type of show, and I was thinking about going, and I'm like, oh, I got an extra $100, in my wallet. I could have a good time, pick up like $3 books, get 30 of them, throw them up on Instagram. And I said, hell no, I'm not going. Because why would I do that in a mask and deal with that? It doesn't seem safe, doesn't seem fun, and it just doesn't seem safe, and it has nothing to do with politics. I don't want to be around people. Right. Honestly, I live alone in my apartment. I go get my mail twice a week. I don't even want to get my mail at this point.
Right.
So I mean, I just think that, and I'm just curious where you think it's going, because to me it's obvious, and and if you don't see it, and this is to everybody, I mean, I don't know what to say to anybody who doesn't see it, but it's obvious to me that putting 100,000 people into a big convention is a nightmare.
Right, and it was always unsafe. This just proves it. Right. It was always unsafe. It was always dangerous. This just proves it that it really is. But you can see that things are changing. Look at Jen King from Space Cadets. She does online shows every day of the week. Does fantastic. And I'm not talking auctions. I'm talking standard comics that came out that week. I sold $300 of Brokedown to that store. It's a random store in Texas that could sell my stuff because they needed some new product and they wanted to share some stuff and talk about it on their program, which is fantastic. I think virtual cons are going to do okay. I think virtual cons haven't figured out a way to sell.
Let's go, Paz.
Yeah, I mean, there's exceptions, but they really haven't figured out a way to make it.
They have pioneered the way, without a doubt. They were the first, and they figured out how to do it. Their first show was okay. Every other show, and probably the last two shows, they've done phenomenal from what I know.
Yeah. Well, and people know, like, for those who sell, like, when I go to a big con, I sell a lot of my comics to Comics Elite. So Comics Elite is a big store, and what they do is they put con exclusives, which I always have some exclusives, and they flip them, and they make tons of money off of my stuff because, again, people just want the exclusivity. People are biased in America, just like he said, to do those things. So now we got to figure out a way to be able to do virtual cons, but the problem is, for every good virtual con, there's a lot of bad ones going on at the same time. So we really need like a Mega, or we need ReedPop or one of these bigger organizations to come up with a good system that can make someone sit around for 8 hours to really get involved in this. And Marvel and DC needs it. I mean, I think it's really cool. San Diego Con, if I'm not mistaken, they're playing New Mutants. I think it's really cool, like the whole movie. Yeah, that's super cool. That's super cool. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done. And if you don't jump on board, you can't do it because you're gonna be missing the boat. Because the stores that are closing right now, it's let me tell you some interesting statistics. So some a lot of people are like, oh my god, stores closing, Diamond shutting down, closed stores. Actually, believe it or not, it actually saved tons of stores because for the first time they didn't have that Diamond stuff, so they could sell back stock and actually catch up. The negative of the comic industry, unlike a Walmart, is they always have to restock every day to be relevant. Where they didn't have to do that for several months, and it actually saved a lot of stores. Other thing that's really interesting, you may not know this, there's a huge poker group that plays in CGC
No,
poker
we can't
shops.
talk about this.
Did
Chuck Pinu, he makes me upset, but he talks about this.
yeah. I was the one who got Chuck in. But yeah, there's a big poker group. You have to get an invite. It's kind of exclusive. If you need an invite, message me. But yeah, and they do CGC. I think there's some people doing some really unique things that I think are going to make a big difference. You know, going to Kickstarter, I think is going to make a big difference. Like the Zenoscopes, like the Lady Deaths, who are making these exclusive covers. I think those are going to be the big deal, and those are going to compensate for all your missing. Kickstarter and Indiegogo can compensate for any missing con that you could ever have with half the work and half the staff.
And I think that answers my next question because I was going to ask you what the future looks like. But I think it's pretty clear
Yeah,
where we're going with this. I think this applies to a lot of stuff where I think the answer is e-commerce
yeah,
is the key and having a digital footprint. I mean, I'm going to inflate my ego and please correct me if I'm wrong. Like what I'm doing on this, and there's a few others like me who are doing this, reaching out to a lot of indie creators and doing interviews like this is also massively important right now.
yeah.
And I think because when I started doing this, I didn't know anybody who was doing this, and I found maybe like 6, 7 people, and I'm sure there's a few others, but like this is becoming also very important on this. And I think Facebook Lives and just that technology has become beyond important now to just communicate with your fans more so.
Yeah, it does. It makes a big difference on when you're pitching a Kickstarter and what you do. And what's cool about it is that all these indie shows, like, they have different goals. Like you have a mixture of indie guys and then pros, where somebody will just, I am only, once you hit to a certain level, I'm not interviewing anymore. Or some guys are, I really like SourceBoard Press, so if you have anything to do with SourceBoard Press, I'm going to get you. And it doesn't mean that you have to be a SourceBoard Press book, but if I have a cover variant by someone from SourcePoint, he wants to interview me. Other than that, he has no interest. I find it super interesting, but the key is getting people on here, getting people who actually care and who are making noise, right? Because a lot of people will just interview anybody. And that's not, and you'll see that they're like, I don't get any views, I don't get any views, because you're not interviewing anybody who makes any waves. Like you're not caring. And you'd be surprised. I'm sure you've messaged people who you never thought you'd get. Who are just like, yeah, sure, I'll go on your show. They don't care.
A
Everyone
lot of
loves to talk
people.
about their stuff. Like, you'd be shocked. And these things are super important if you want to make a career of this. Everybody who's ever made it in comics did this for a real long time before they shut their mouth. Alan Moore. The reason why you have all these crazy Alan Moore comments is because he talked and talked and talked. Kirkman talked and talked and talked. The people who are going to make it are the people who are willing to do and sit down with anybody and talk about their craft and get sound bites so they can be used for them later.
And talking about sound bites, let's go create one because we've been talking for a while now, and I've been
Yeah,
buying your time, probably a little too long to be exact. But
I don't care.
I do want to give you a platform to promote yourself. You know, the Kickstarter's out, and people should be looking at that. Where can people find you on social media, Facebook page? Where can people find? I think it's Orange Cone is your publishing company.
Yeah, Orange Cone is my publishing company, but I don't have a website for Orange Cone. I do that on purpose. I have the individual titles that you're interested in. So go to Brokedown Four Dead Bodies if you want to buy Brokedown. Go to VoodooNations.com if you want to check out Voodoo Nations. And then a new one launches pretty soon. We didn't talk about it, but I have a book coming out in October called Cthulhu Invades Oz, which is going to be really cool. A lot of the Scout guys, all of the SourcePoint guys. It's been making a lot of waves. A lot of people are talking about it. That's going to be really good. You can find me at Travis Gibb on Facebook. You can find me at Jester Lou on Instagram or Twitter. We've got 22 days left on the Kickstarter. I know people watch these videos at various times, but you really want to jump on this one. I think it's going to be good. If you don't know, for Brokedown, like there's variant covers that don't exist anymore because people bought them. I don't have any Frank Ouzin artist editions anymore. They're gone. They're out in the world. I printed 250 of them. You don't want to be missing out if you're a collector later and trying to find this stuff.
And where can people find the Kickstarter? Just type it in, link.
Yeah,
Like
type in
that.
Voodoo Nations. I did not buy a vanity, unfortunately. I need to do that, but I have not done it yet.
So just for everybody to know that if you go on Kickstarter, you type in Voodoo Nations, it should pop up. If you type in Travis Gibb, it should also pop up.
Yep, it'll
I
pop up.
believe. If you also type in Brokedown and Four Dead Bodies, it might bring up the past Kickstarters, and then it will link there if you click the profile. There's a variety of ways. I'll be putting a link down in this video for those who want to find that link very easily. So it'll be kind of the first thing you see that pops up in the comment section down below. And so I think that's everything. I don't know if there's anything else out there that'll get the link to us, or where people can find stuff, or if there's something on your website with Brokedown and Four Dead Bodies.
Yeah, you could find it on both of them. There'll be a link to both of them on both of the websites to get to the Kickstarter. But yeah, thank you for having me on, man.
Yeah, no, thank you for being on. I mean, we've been wanting to do this for almost a month now, too, which is crazy. But I've been so busy and just trying to manage everything. But I'm glad we did it. I appreciate it. And I'm just going to say, because I've been saying this to everybody, that obviously if you got some extra money, throw it at this Kickstarter, support it, or buy that variant, because I'm going to be buying that 100 Bolts variant, because that thing, it looks sick. It's going to be really cool just to have in my collection. I hope you make it so that I sell it for money later on, but neither here nor there. But in all seriousness, what I've been saying to everybody is that if you got extra money, go support indie comics. Go throw money at the Kickstarter. Go check it out. Pick it up on a Comixology. Pick up a digital copy. Pick up a print copy. Definitely support it. And if you don't have money, just check out the website. Follow on social media. Those things mean things too, and they're very important. Share the Kickstarter link on your social media. Share it around, tweet at it. Do something with it just to get it out there, because you never know who's watching what. And it does make a difference, and it shows interest not only to the Kickstarter, gets it more attention, but also to publishers and other groups. So that's something to keep in mind, everybody, that unless you don't have internet or electricity, and if you don't, please call me. Please call me. Because A, I would like to know how you're watching me, because that would be fascinating. Because if you're watching me inside your head, I mean, we got to license that stuff. Secondly, and then if you really don't have electricity or internet, I will help you. And I promise I will help you in ways you cannot even imagine. So please, but anything else is just an excuse, meaning that you're just making excuses, and we're not tolerating that anymore.
Well, even one of the things that I do is I do backer goals and lots of digital copies. So right now, if you bid $1 on Voodoo Nations, you won't get Voodoo Nations, but you'll get 7 other digital comics. And by the end of our campaign, it's normally about 10 or 20. So you're going to get tons of digital comics for $1. So if it's a really good investment, and I'm really known because people really like me in the community, so I've got a lot of stuff. There's one more thing I want to show you. I know you're a pup guy, so I want to show you something cool.
Oh boy, here we go.
So here's one. You see, that is a Denver pup.
Okay, we got a Denver pup right there from Brokedown.
Look at how cool that is, little Denver, a Brokedown pup. And we've got Randy. My wife spends way too much money on things and got me custom pups for my characters. And these are custom pups, not just from random dudes on the internet, because my wife doesn't do that. This is the guy who makes Bruno Mars custom pups and like celebrity custom pups for TV shows. She's not just finding the guy on Etsy who could do it. No, she's got to find the guy who would charge her the most amount of money.
Well, I think we're going to end on that note with Denver and Randy custom pops, which I think is the best way how to end, might I add.
Yeah.